Welcome to the Feel Better, Be Better show. Today, Kate and Nevada will answer your questions and introduce new topics designed to help feel better and be better. These are raw conversations, but they will make a difference.
All right, so we're going to start off today. You're doing the introduction?
Inflation!
Oh, gosh. Yes, so we're out here in the lovely training facility of sports and athletics to talk to you about finances.
Best topic ever.
Yes. No, actually, I really did want to talk about this one because it's kind of a hot topic right now. I think you've heard some about it.
Heard a little bit about inflation.
A little bit, yeah. No, I think
in
the one...
In general or, like, recently?
Just, I mean, I think the biggest one for me is the...
You missed it. You're supposed to say yes.
Yes.
It's always
yes.
Your answer.
Yes. No, I heard a podcast from some people back in COVID era. So I'm catching up on their old podcast. And they're about as far away from financial as you can be. And they don't they're not like this one where they're sitting back going like, I actually do think I kind of know about some things in financial world.
What?
And they were just, it was funny because they were talking about the stimulus payments and the increase of like all the wages and everything and the minimum wage increases and all that stuff. And all they talked about is how it was going to be super inflationary. And I was dying inside because that was about a year before we started hitting or not even a year, but like 6 months before we started hitting the transitory inflation talk, which to me was, I thought it was, I was like, oh no, that is like, don't say that. Like, cause
Can you explain transitory inflation?
Okay. Well, the idea behind transitory inflation is that the prices were going up because we had all this pent up demand from COVID. That they had all this stuff they wanted to buy, but they couldn't get it before, so that's why prices are going high. So they considered it to be just like, it's just a little transitory inflation. They were kind of saying that it was a blip. But I just am kind of laughing. Like I said, these guys that have nothing to do with finances, as soon as they started talking about the minimum wage increases, the stimulus payments, and all the money they pumped in the system to try to combat against the COVID pandemic, that they said there were going to be a lot of inflation, which anybody that really kind of knows finances would have told you that. But during those times, I remember those times, all the guys kept talking about was just like, well, that's what we need. Prices shouldn't take off because there's not enough other stuff like that. But there was just huge, huge demand, which has made prices go up. And then, just like they talk about in deflationary, that they were trying to fight deflation before during the teens, about how if inflation or deflation catches on, it's really hard because once you get that feeling, like prices are going to go up, you spend more. Well, you're spending more people are spending, prices go up. So it's kind of self-fulfilling. Same thing with deflation. If you're thinking that prices are going to go down, why would you spend money right now? You're going to save it. So I mean, that's why they talk about it. It's kind of self-perpetuating on that one. But anyway, as we're talking more and more, now we're talking about, you got California and a couple other states that are looking at doing minimum wage increases again, which is kind of the opposite of what the Fed is telling you.
I was going to say, aren't they trying to like slow it down with interest rates going up?
Yes. So
isn't that the goal?
Yeah, and that's where it gets really confusing with the Fed. So the Fed, which isn't a governmental entity, it's a completely separate thing. Their job is to make sure that the banks maintain their liquidity so we can have a run on the bank. Now, it doesn't mean that we don't ever. Banks can still do things they shouldn't do. They can get caught into problems they shouldn't get caught into, like
the housing crisis.
Well, that one was different. That one they did have to do the different regulations because the lending requirements kind of got a little out of whack there.
Yeah.
The one I'm thinking more of, like Silicon Valley Bank that went down last year. You can say, well, shouldn't the Treasury or the Fed then they fail there? Well, not really. I mean, they did, but they didn't. And it wasn't like SVP was doing something bad. They just got caught in the inflationary thing. They had too many things in long-term low yields that threw off their ratio when interest rates went up. And once the ratio got out of whack, you kind of get in that thing where it's a fire sale. You do fire sales and you start running into where you lose money and it makes it worse and it just gets bad. So the Fed stepped in and took care of everybody. And I did that to make sure they maintained the integrity of the system. And it stopped there. Because, I mean, the rates they increased on, the highest ever in record, the fastest they've ever done rate increases. So it actually is kind of a testament that the banking system actually held up. Well, I'm not. I think a lot of the bankers had a lot of work to do to make sure they could keep their reserves in the appropriate order. But it's a real testament that they were very liquid and secure.
Mm-hmm.
So, but anyway, that is all the Fed really focuses on, except for unemployment. So their job is to keep inflation down and unemployment high. Sorry, inflation down and unemployment down. And so and it's kind of a delicate balance. What we're facing right now, and if anybody's ever looked at it here recently, is that we've had a lot of job openings and not a lot of people filling positions.
I was going to say, you see we're hiring signs everywhere, which, a few years back, it was hard to find a lot of opportunities.
Well, they were doing layoffs, especially in COVID. I mean, everything was switching over to remote work, and, people were delivering all your food to you. And I mean, it was a different, and there was a lot laid off jobs because they didn't know what's going on. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, it's a real different environment. Well, the way all that works is, so when your unemployment goes down, people have more spending power. More spending power, you have more people buying for the same stuff. Thus, people can charge a higher price for the same thing because more people are willing to buy it. Supply demand, modern easy economics. So you could say, well, then we want more unemployment. Well, then the problem you run into is people got to pay for their lifestyle. So, I mean, it's a real delicate balance that the Fed is trying to do. And I'm not trying to say they do it good. I'm not saying they do it bad. That is a job they're trying to do. But with that, really what the Fed is trying to do right now is they're trying to make it a little more painful to lend money, to borrow money. Thus, pulling back on the investment a little bit in the U.S. economy. Thus, we have less hiring, less wage increases and stuff like that. Means you have less dollars going off the same goods, should pull inflation back. That's the whole theory.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same side, we have a lot of these states trying to increase minimum wage, increase living wages and stuff like that, like you should. And that is competing directly against what the Fed is trying to do, and that's why inflation is remaining what they call sticky.
Now, okay, I might derail us here for a little bit here, but so I feel like the biggest area we noticed the quickest and the fastest, and you and I talked about it, it might just be because we have rentals in general, but in the housing market, like, it went bananas. People buying stuff at high marked up prices before anybody else get on there, multiple bids for houses and stuff like that. And we've talked about how they increased the interest rate to try to bring that down, and it wasn't working. Why would something like that happen?
Okay. Well, that's a supply-demand issue. It stems back from the housing crisis.
Mm-hmm.
So during the Great Recession, there were a lot of builders and stuff like that they lost a lot of money. They had a lot of projects in place, and it didn't really work out. So a lot of them kind of switched over to doing repairs for a little while. There were plenty of houses on the market, but they weren't really building a lot of new houses. And part of the reason why, not only did they lose some money and they kind of got burned a little bit, but also because at the same time we started doing all these green initiatives, which I'm not saying I'm against. I'm just saying that's what we started doing. So the standards for them to build a new house became so much higher.
Mm-hmm.
So as of like right now, it's almost impossible to really build a house for less than like $300,000. So anyway, so a lot of people are like, builders need to put in more affordable housing. Well, unfortunately, to make sure everything's energy efficient to help against greenhouse gases, you pretty much can't do that. It's like almost impossible for the concrete for the floor, the wood for the walls, and the roof, and all the other stuff that you have to do. You're looking at,
especially with the price of everything going up too on top of that.
That's part of that, that's where inflation fed that. But I mean, so you can't, there's not really a good inflationary, there's a good way to kind of make it affordable housing. Now, there's plenty of people that are, I'm sure we got millions of listeners listening from the coast and everything like that would just, oh my God, a $200,000, $300,000 home. We're looking at the Midwest there. Obviously, prices change quite a bit on the coast and everything like that. But for the Midwest here, I mean, an affordable house around here should be somewhere between like $150,000 and $200,000. But you can't build those homes right now for less than $300,000. So that's why there's all of a sudden not a whole lot of demand or a whole lot of supply there. So you have way less supply. The demand is still getting larger because We're still growing as a nation, so we're having more people, more families, more people looking for places with less and less demand. Back to economics 101, more demand, less supply, pricing is going to go up.
So did that just happen to be weird timing with everything as far as like COVID with extra money and the minimum wage and stuff going up, and just happen to be around the same time that you also have more people looking at buying houses for the first time that would be in that first rate market? Or
well, ultimately it was, well, I'd probably put it more of like a perfect storm, but it wasn't unexpected. A lot of it comes down to demographics. You have the baby boomer generation that is, yeah, they're starting to get to the point where they're needing to sell their homes, maybe look into some more like assisted living and stuff like that, but they are one of the wealthiest generations we've ever had. Mm-hmm. Most of them have retirement accounts and houses and stuff that some of us could only dream of having. And it was a testament to them doing very good economically. They just happened to hit a right time in the world where they were able to prosper very well. So they're not really getting out of their housing at the same time this millennial generation, which is larger than the baby boomers, are starting to have families and looking for houses. Generation X, Generation Y, all those other generations were so much smaller that we weren't able to really see that issue. So overall, it wasn't surprising that right now in the 20s was a big demand year. It's been, if you know anything about how demographics kind of work as compared to how the markets are, this was kind of expected. The teens were going to be a little rough, and the 20s were going to start another boom year because, you know, I know, you get into those years where you're starting to have a family, you're going to need cars, you're going to need furniture, you're going to need plates, you're going to need silverware, you're going to need baby stuff. I mean, you just, and you start having kid stuff with sports and all that kind of other things. I mean, everything, there's a lot of expenses going out, and you're not necessarily saving a whole lot or investing. Mm-hmm. So when you have that too, you have a lot of people needing housing and places to live and that kind of stuff. So that's kind of a boom time when you see those demographic type things happening. So while I want to sit back and say it was kind of expected, the Fed and those type of places they know that kind of stuff and they look at it, but at the same time, they're looking for a short-term view. So they're trying to kind of fight the fire right now, not necessarily plan to have the forest not ever burn down again. So they could have, I don't want to say they could have missed it. They were trying to tame the problem they had in front of them, and the other bigger problem was looming. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's a tough one to get. And I think the hardest one, and this one is difficult to say. I mean, I would love to see everybody be successful, but without some kind of a stratification, then it's going to get really hard to kind of not have inflation. And what I mean by that is minimum wage was set up as a minimum. It wasn't necessarily supposed to be a livable wage. I understand that there are plenty of places that a lot of people want to live, that the only job they can find is a job that would be a minimum wage job. But I mean, and I hate to kind of say this, but I mean, unfortunately, you're probably going to have a hard time affording things. And unfortunately, that's why some people move from a place they really want to be at to a place where they can make things work. It's a trade-off you have to do. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, if you don't have the minimum wage was more set up for kids to get, you know, some workforce experience to be able to go to their next job to when they maybe can work up to a living wage. And unfortunately, it seems like we're kind of trapped in this thing in the media and everything like that that's trying to be like that a minimum wage job should afford you the luxuries of being a living wage worker. And as soon as you do that, like we have done here recently, where we've almost de facto increased the minimum wage, is when you start seeing inflation take off and everything like that. Now, in the history of all of those things, whenever they've measured things for people like that, when you see a minimum wage increase, you have a very short window where the people that are on minimum wage and they see that increase, they get a little bit better economically for a little while, and then it goes away because inflation catches up. And usually they're in a worse position after everything shakes out than they were before they got their raise, which seems insane. But whether you make $1 million a year or $10,000 a year, you're going to eat roughly about the same amount of food. There's only so much you can change. And somebody said, yeah, you can spend a lot more on food than somebody else, but you don't have to. Mm-hmm. And so usually the food costs, the gas costs, and the stuff like that, they go up really quickly impact you more on a minimum wage job when the minimum wage is increased and you see inflation. That's where you feel it. So usually by the time all the inflation works its way out, you're in a worse position than you were when you were making less money per hour, which seems insane to even say, but that's how the stats work out. That anytime you see a minimum wage increase, it actually is going to hurt you if you're a minimum wage worker. It's hard to make sense on that one. Mm-hmm. So what else we got relating to inflation here? So the next one they're expecting now is to see stagflation, which we saw in the 70s.
What's that?
That's when you have inflation with a stagnant economy. It's not exactly a real good thing to be in because it's hard to get an increase at your job if you have a stagnant economy. If you're not basically growing as a company, it's really hard to issue raises, but everything around you, prices are going up. Mm-hmm. And that's usually when you see a little bit of a lowering of the living standard in your area.
So what causes that?
Exactly what we have right now, where you have increases in minimum wage and stuff like that without having necessarily
an increase in demand.
Well, without having the profits to come with it. So basically, there's hardly anybody winning and everybody's pretty much losing. That's kind of a situation where you got like, there's no stratification. So you pull people up so much that the middle class starts getting squeezed. Then basically nobody can really do good at all. Everybody's just stuck in that same thing, and that's how you get stagflation. So yeah, it's one of those things where the income inequality rule comes out all the time. People complain about how it's worse than ever, which on a dollar wise, you're completely dead right. I mean, of course it's getting, different because getting larger because the dollars are starting to get bigger from just normal inflation. So the dollar amount should get wider. Like I had a big one that one of the guys constantly go on the fact that credit card debt is higher than it's ever been. I'm like, 10% inflation. So what should it have been, which would have been lower than what it is? So actually, we're not in a good spot, but we're not exactly in a oh my god spot. So that one's kind of one of those ones that it's a little deceiving. As far as income inequality, we're still one of the best in the world. I mean, our stratification is better than most other places. I'm not saying it's good. There's some people that have a ton of money or are worth a ton of money. And when we're on that, we should really speak about that one. So, you got like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and all them guys. And of course, everybody's like, they could give $1 million to everybody and still have whatever.
Yeah, money. You see, I think I saw something that like to just show it. They showed like grains of rice compared to like a normal person. And it's
unfathomable.
Crazy. Yeah. You can't imagine it until you see the image of it, and then you still can't even imagine what it would be like to have that much extra money.
Well, there's a couple of those that are really crazy, but anyhow, the whole thing I'm trying to get at is most of theirs is they don't really have that wealth. That's what they're worth. Mm-hmm. So as soon as they would start selling some of the shares of their companies, the price of the per share would go down, and their worth would go down. I'm not trying to say they aren't rich; they're beyond rich. It's insane. But some of those are kind of wild on like, you can check some of like the metrics. But if I threw you in a booth with $1 million in ones, how much could you walk away with? Now your thing is like, I'd find every spot to be able to tuck them in no matter what, every place I'd walk away with a full million. Sounds great, right? It weighs over a ton. That's how much in dollar bills $1 million is, over a ton. You cannot carry it. It's impossible. But everybody thinks they can. That's how much money it is. It's insane. But in a way, those guys are already kind of giving money back. Everyone's going to taxes and everything like that, but they're creating huge businesses that have tons and tons of people have livelihoods that are off of that. Mm-hmm. And in a way, we almost want and need those crazy billionaires to help fuel the economy like we're going, to give somebody a chance to be able to find a way to do something better, to be able to make some money off of them. That's the whole idea of the free market. So it's kind of crazy when you're actually kind of, in a way, we kind of want to root for them. At the same time, I'm really big on some of the antitrust laws to keep them from having a monopoly and being able to manipulate markets. But at the same side, we kind of need them to do well, or we don't have those good jobs.
Yeah. Well, it feels like a lot of those, you say some of those names and we know them really well for maybe one or two businesses that they maybe own. But I don't know very many successful entrepreneurs that only have one business venture that they are involved in. usually it seems like when you get something going, they tend to like go into other areas where they expand and do business or whatever.
Well, Amazon's a great one to go off of. I mean, they started as an online book dealer. I mean, now they sell everything. Mm-hmm. But you know where they make their real money at? Cloud computing storage. Started off as a book retailer. Their main profitable business is online data storage. So that just shows you where businesses can go all over the place.
Yeah.
Trying to think like Elon Musk. I mean, his businesses are all over the board. I mean, where does he actually make his money at?
Yeah, I mean, you hear everybody just talks about Tesla, but that can't be the only thing he's got.
Tesla just started making a profit. Just started making a profit. It's a little profit, and he's going up against Ford, GM, Toyota. Those companies don't exactly rake in billions. Mm-hmm. They make good money. But for the size of their sales and stuff, they're not crazy for a profitable business. As far as the space stuff goes, I mean, that's a money loser. I mean, that's the whole point that NASA opened it up, was to get some competition to make it to where it was economically feasible for us to do those type projects. They're still not there. So, yeah. I mean, it's not like they're making money off of that yet. So, I mean, yeah, Elon Musk's fortune is very interesting, but mostly he made it off of some of his prior businesses. And don't get me wrong, Tesla's doing great. I mean, they've taken a company, completely redefined an industry, and are starting to make a profit. I mean, good for them, but I don't see how they're going to ever get carried away with it. Mm-hmm. Cars and batteries have been around for a long, long time. There's plenty of competition there.
I'm just saying it's interesting because we know these people for maybe one business, but they usually have their hands in a lot of other things.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Yeah, and you kind of want them to, because most businesses that try fail. I mean, it's kind of one of those things where if you want to have a successful business, congratulations, you need to go through 9 unsuccessful ones. So you better get moving on those 9 unsuccessful ones. I mean, that's kind of the way the numbers work out. Mm-hmm. Most people do the one unsuccessful, say, I can't do it, and quit. It's the people that go, you know what, that one didn't work, I'm going to try again. Those are the ones that make it through. And then, of course, you know, Amazon was an overnight sensation. It started in, what, the 90s? Jeez, Facebook, you know, and set it up, and it was good. He made $1 billion right out the get-go. I mean, yeah, it didn't take 7 years at all. Whatever. So now on inflation. Inflation is a secret tax. It's kind of an interesting way to look at that. The Fed comes out. I mean, they're trying to get to 2 to 3% inflation. It used to be 2. Now they've changed it to 2 to 3 because they think it's going to be hard to get it down to 2 again here soon. And they're probably right. But that 2 and 3% is going to eat away at you pretty quick. I mean, that's why we have inflation. But again, inflation mainly affects the poor worse than the rich. So in a way, we kind of, if you're not, you know, making $300,000 a year or more, you kind of almost don't want inflation. But that also means you probably aren't going to look at getting too many raises. Probably not going to look at the value of your house go up too much. So I mean, the government is playing a little bit of a psychological game with you on that one, because we feel better when our house is worth more money. We feel better when our investments are up 10%. You know, we feel better when we get a raise from work. If you don't have those things happening, we don't have inflation. So it's kind of one of those things where you have to change your perspective real quickly. You're like, no, I'm good with making what I make right now in 10 years. As long as the cost still costs that. If we did that, chances are costs would actually probably go down, because we do get more efficient all the time. So I don't see that one ever happening, but the mindset on that one has to change a little bit.
Yeah, that's going to be hard to change a lot of mindset to be able to get there.
Yeah, it will never happen. It just won't happen. Yeah. But I mean, I'll make sure you look at inflation correctly, which is, it is an invisible, or not invisible, but it's a shadow tax. Basically, your spending power is getting eaten up by that inflation all the time. Any other crazy questions on inflation?
I don't know. Is there anything else you need to know? Or
I mean, it's
tough. Or out of the normal?
So many things out there, but I mean, without inflation, you don't have the raises, you don't have the increases, you don't feel wealthier. Mm-hmm. But inflation is going to, if you're not gaining more than other people, you're going to slowly but surely get more poor.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's going to be tough to get rid of. Once you kind of start that, it's going to be hard to get off. I think it's going to hurt people more than they want. As far as the housing market goes, the affordability index is way off the charts, which I think anybody that's looking for a house would understand.
Yeah.
It's really hard to find something that's affordable. And unfortunately, we're going to have to accept a lower standard of living to basically make things ends meet.
I was to say, between that and groceries right now, I feel like that's where people feel it and it hurts the most.
Yep. And somebody could say, well, am I calling for like the housing market to go down? Not really. I mean, I think it probably will plateau. People have a hard time taking less money. You got a lot of people locked in a lot of low rates. You got for the most part, housing owners have a big gain on their house because of inflation. So they're not necessarily, in almost every situation, if they were going to be like switching housing, they would be in a worse situation. So it's kind of hard for a reason for them to want to sell. The only way that the housing market's going to go down is if you have a lot more sellers. You need more sellers than buyers for the price to turn.
Yeah. But
it can plateau for a while. I mean, it can be a 1% gain for a couple of years and not be beating out inflation. All of a sudden, that doesn't look like a very good investment. So I think you'll see stuff like that for a little while until the affordability gets back in line. But I mean, after the Great Recession, what a shocker. Real estate was a great buy. I mean, you're looking at, compared to the GDP and all the stuff we had going in the economy in 2009, housing was as cheap as it ever had been. So, of course, it's going to go on a great run. And everybody's sitting back going like, I had to pay $30,000 more for this house, but it's a great investment. It's like, that ain't going to hold up. It just isn't going to stay there. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. So, yeah, I don't know what else I would tell you. It's a lot of things. So, and if that's the case and you don't have anything else that you could think of that I totally missed, then we'll just call it a night that everybody knows exactly what we're doing in inflation.
Thank you for watching Kate in Nevada. Hope you've enjoyed this show and found it useful and empowering. If you have any questions or comments, please contact them at Knetix.com. That's KNETICX.com. They're on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok as well. And please write a review of the show. Kate in Nevada appreciate hearing the feedback, and they welcome your reviews, and your word of mouth will help others learn how to feel better and be better.